Hello guys and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I've been playing a lot of Fellowship and this is going to be my first impressions in terms of how it feels to play, how it compares to World of Warcraft, because I'm coming from World of Warcraft. I think a lot of player base is coming from World of Warcraft and there might be on the fence in terms of should I try out Fellowship. I'll talk about the good things, the bad things in comparison to WoW. I'll talk about healing and how Fellowship healing differs from something like World of Warcraft and whether it's good or bad. So let's go and get started. And the first thing we have to talk about is going to be class design. And I've been playing Vigor, I've been playing my healer, and I actually genuinely am impressed on the amount of depth you can achieve. Again, I mainly played healer. So the amount of depth you can achieve from healing in Fellowship with the few buttons that you have. This is my healer Vigor, which is kind of combination between Paladin and Priest. If you look at World of Warcraft terms, you have these runes, which is kind of like combo points, and there's multiple ways to generate these runes. You also have an ability on 60-second cooldown that gives you additional runes, and you can spend these runes in multiple different ways, which are basically going to cost no mana. So you can be extremely efficient in terms of using your runes, generating your runes, and doing healing. If you don't have any runes available, you might be forced or have to cast things like Greater Heal. Greater Heal heals for a decent amount, but it also costs a lot of mana. So you're constantly fighting the battle between efficiency and throughput, and you can run out of mana. That's something that you have to be aware of. I don't know how other healers deal with it. I'm pretty sure it's something very similar, but you constantly have to decide, do I want to be more efficient, or how do I become more efficient? Do my rune abilities that heal, are they enough to bypass certain stages? And I think that's actually really interesting. On top of that, you don't have a whole lot of buttons. There's a decent amount of buttons, and then I'm keybinding on my relics. We talked about the fact that relics are basically like trinkets, but relics actually provide a huge amount of utility. For example, I have a relic that gives 15% damage reduction to yourself and nearby allies for 15 seconds. There's also a relic that allows you to use Balres, which I really want to get, but I don't have right now. The complexity is there, even though there isn't a huge amount of buttons, because you have talents. In this example, you have talents like Grand Design. So your Soul Brand, Rune of Renewal, and Luminous Barrier abilities can now be overcharged, causing the ability to be cast on up to 4 applicable targets at once. And what does that mean? You basically have a dot. You basically have this hot, that not really hot, but basically a heal that is instant cast, and it also applies a buff that means your healing is more powerful on those targets and stuff like that, which is great. And then you have a shield, something very similar to Discipline Priest. Now, because you have this talent in terms of Grand Design, I can hold these buttons. I have these 3 buttons and I can hold them. For example, in this case, I'm going to hold my dot right now and I cast Soul Brand on all these enemies right here. If I want to have an AoE shielding, I can cast or hold my Luminous Barrier and it's going to apply shielding on up to 4 targets. So this is how Fellowship creates more in-depth gameplay without actually giving you more buttons, because they give you 2 multiple ways of using a single button. And I think that's actually really surprisingly cool. You can achieve a lot of complexity with less buttons, and I'm all for that. And to touch a little bit more onto healing, a lot of the times you might actually have people sitting on 50% HP, 60% HP, and you let them rest, and because you might not have the combo points, you might not have, maybe you're trying to preserve mana and things like that, or maybe your spec or class is not capable of topping up everyone 24/7. So a lot of the times you might let people sit not topped up, and I think that's so different from World of Warcraft. In World of Warcraft, if you're doing like higher end Mythic Plus content, you basically have to keep everyone topped up most of the time, because there is a lot of one-shots, there's a lot of, again, scalable content, everything becomes harder. I'm not sure how healing is going to feel the higher I'm going to progress, but it's been a little bit of an eye-opener in terms of the different types of healing that you can have, in terms of prioritizing which player to heal. There's been many instances, because I do think that the jump from contender to adept can be extremely high, and there's many times where I join a group and someone is just taking a lot of avoidable damage and I'm sinking my healing into them, and I feel extremely punished because of that. In World of Warcraft, I still think you can just kind of brute force through a lot of things. In Fellowship, you might not be able to brute force depending on your item level and all those things. And again, keep in mind, this is new game, everyone's learning mechanics, everyone's learning routes and all those things, and it can feel extremely punishing to be a healer, but it is actually really fun. And there are little quality of life improvements that I think Blizzard should definitely look into it. For example, simple as mana regen. Your mana regen outside of combat in Fellowship increases immensely, so you never have to drink as a healer. Instead, you just get mana back really quickly. In World of Warcraft, if you need mana, you need to sit down and you drink, your group is already pulling the next pack, you're falling behind. In Fellowship, the second you're in combat, you're getting more mana, you're constantly going and going. Of course, this also has some downsides because you might be stuck in combat because something bugged out and you can't regen mana fast. And again, it happened to me once, and this is early development game. It happened to me once where I was stuck in combat and I wasn't able to generate mana, but it's quite rare. So I really like the mana regen implementation that Fellowship did. It's also worth noting that interrupts in Fellowship are extremely important the higher you go, just like in World of Warcraft. Missing an interrupt means that in most cases your healer life is going to be a lot more difficult. And in Fellowship case, it's very interesting that they chose not to give interrupts to healers. Now, as Vigor, I do have a stun that can be used as an interrupt, but it doesn't work on mobs that are not stunnable, so it's not really an interrupt. So it's very interesting that Fellowship chose to give less agency to healers, basically tell the healers to focus on healing and damage, because healer damage can actually be impactful, and both of the healers, both Sylvie and Vigor, benefit from DPS, but they don't really have a pure interrupt. And I really want to know your opinion. But honestly, one of the best things about this game that I honestly didn't feel that I needed is the dungeon length. Most of these dungeons are around 12 minutes in length, and you can just go and you can finish them really quickly. And only the last couple of keystone dungeons that you do at the end of each tier. In Contender, you will do, again, if you go to the end of the dungeon, you'll have to do this dungeon. In Adept, you'll have to do this dungeon, and again, I can't pronounce it. And these dungeons are around 30 minutes or somewhere close to it. So there's only a couple of dungeons in the game that require more than 12 minutes, and most of the dungeons require 12 minutes. And even if you don't get any good piece of loot, or if you get duplicate piece of loot at the end of the dungeon, you might be like, oh, that was wasted. I don't know why I did that. It's not wasted, because you can go and scrap that piece of gear. You can get gold. You also get gold on top of it. And you can use gold to go to the blacksmith and then upgrade your piece of gear to have higher item level and progress and feel like you're getting powerful. So you're never wasting your time in a dungeon. Unlike something like World of Warcraft, which I feel like a lot of the dungeons might be 30 minutes plus. Again, in previous expansions, there were dungeons that were like 40 minutes, which I felt like were extremely long. And you might do that. You might do 4 dungeons and you might get gold that is going to be utterly useless in terms of upgrading your character. And the only good thing about not getting any loot in World of Warcraft is filling your weekly vault. But if you already filled your weekly vault, you're basically doing that dungeon for absolutely nothing if you don't get the right piece of gear. So I think the way that gearing works in this game is actually kind of very interesting. Now let's talk about some of the glaring issues that I found so far. Now keep in mind, this game is in development and feedback is very important. So first of all, keybinds. You have these abilities here. You can right click on them and set a slot keybind. And in this case, it is greater heal. And in World of Warcraft, I have my shift left click used. I have my shift right click. I have my control left click to dispel magic debuffs and all that. I can't do shift left click. There is no capabilities of doing shift left click or shift right click. There's just, you can't do it. So now my greater heal is just keybound to shift. Getting these keybinds, I'm sure you can do it by using like certain macros from your keyboard or certain other software, but it should be built into the game to allow you to do something like this. And I think this would be a big quality of life for a lot of players coming from World of Warcraft and copying their keybinds into Fellowship, so everything feels like a seamless transition. Other things, your health frames do not show out of range targets, which is absolutely wild to me. If someone dies in a dungeon or something like that and they release, you cannot tell if they're out of your range or not. If a tank moves out of your range, you have no indication to show that that person cannot be healed. There's multiple times where I try to heal people and the heals don't go off because they're out of range. There is no grayed out or anything along those. Like in World of Warcraft, if you're out of range, you basically have a different opacity, which is, you know, grayed out or something along those lines, which is a clear indication that they're not in your range and you can't heal them. This game does not have it. Absolutely wild that it doesn't have it, especially from a healer point of view, but I'm hoping that that's going to be implemented very, very soon. In terms of other UI aspects, if you go to the edit HUD section, you'll notice this is very similar to something like the edit mode in World of Warcraft or LUI settings. It's very, very, very close to that. I would like additional options to be available for buffs. For example, there's a lot of buffs that you might need to track, and there's certain buffs that you want to really track and certain buffs that you don't really care. Like, for example, there are certain specs or classes out there who might have like 20 buffs visible, but they only need to track like 5 of those in order to really min-max their class, and you can't really do that. You can't emphasize certain buffs that you really want to track, or there's no filtering whatsoever. This is a big quality of life that would help a lot of classes out there, in my honest opinion. Just additional filtering for buffs, for debuffs. Another thing that I would like that to be added, and I want to know your opinion about this, because again, I haven't been able to play this game as much as I would like to. The servers, there's huge queues out there. This is the best problem you can have. There's more players than the developers are able to support, because this is a relatively small game. There's a huge popularity, it's exploded. But if you go into further kind of challenges, if you go to, I heard in Eternal, you need to have a 4-set group in order to progress this. You can't just pug it, or you can't do like a solo queue that I'm doing right now. And there is nothing in game to help you to create that 4-set group that you want to do. You have to add friends from, or use Discord or something along those lines. I would like that to be an in-game tool to allow you to be like, hey, I'm looking for a 4-set group to push higher tiers, and I want to progress with you. And you have to use external sites for that, which might not be a deal breaker, but it's something that I kind of would like to have, but I really want to know your opinion on this. Another thing that I found, that I'm not sure if this is applicable to other classes or roles, but some of the abilities that you press just don't have this feedback. I'm not sure how to explain this, but if I use Radiant Blast, it doesn't have any kind of oomph to it when you compare it to some of the World of Warcraft abilities that you use, and you kind of feel them. You feel like you pressed it. For example, if I do use something like Circle of Light, I do kind of notice it, I do kind of feel it, but there are certain buttons they just don't have that impact. And I feel like this is more to do with animations, this is more to do with like creating a feel when you use certain buttons. So to summarize the good things that I thought Fellowship is doing really well, I think the class design, again, I'm talking from a healer perspective, I think the healer class design has been really good. I'm not sure how it feels to play a tank or a DPS, let me know. So far, I enjoyed the complexity that you can achieve with a smaller number of buttons, and I think that's really cool. The utility that you get from dungeons, or in terms of battle res, in terms of shroud, in terms of AoE damage reduction, it's coming from relics, which can be comparable to trinkets in World of Warcraft. So you're not really, how do I say, you don't have to bring a specific class, but you might want to bring certain players that have those relics, which is very different from World of Warcraft, where you have these class buffs that you want, where certain classes provide battle res, certain classes provide bloodlust, and you want those, or you need to have those. So I like the way that they implement the relic utility. I also think that the gearing is really interesting, because no dungeon is ever wasted. You're always getting something in order to upgrade your gear, and I talked about this already, and I think that's actually pretty cool. And lastly, I know I already covered this, but 12-minute dungeons are absolutely a game changer. I know you only have 4 people in your party. You don't have 5 people like you have in World of Warcraft in terms of 5-man dungeons. You have 4 people, and the dungeons are 12 minutes or around 12 minutes. We talked about some of the capstone dungeons being longer, but those are in order to progress later down the stages and things like that. It's a game changer. There is a reason why some of the most popular World of Warcraft dungeons have been things like Maw Souls, which you could farm in very, very short period of time. People gravitate towards something that is relatively short, and you can get your vaults filled up and all those things in a relatively quick manner. And I think Blizzard needs to pay attention to this. I genuinely think this could be one of the best things that Fellowship implemented, in terms of, hey, I'll just do one more key, it's only 12 minutes. I'll just do another key, it's only 12 minutes. I think that is absolutely fantastic. In terms of bad things, we already talked about the lack of key binding options. I think that's a big deal. Most of the bad things have to do with the UI, in my honest opinion. The out of range, or very little of indication if someone is out of range. There's nothing there. I think that's actually crazy. Filtering in terms of buffs, debuffs, and all that, I think should be added. I think it's very, very nice. But overall, I think there's a lot of good things about Fellowship, and there's a couple of bad things about Fellowship. Now, my overall summary of the video is that I think World of Warcraft Mythic Plus is more polished. It has, again, the dungeons that you have, the different design, the feedback of abilities and all those. I think World of Warcraft Mythic Plus is going to be very, very hard to beat. World of Warcraft has been a market leader for over 2 decades, and there's not going to be an indie game that comes in and just completely takes all the player base and then just destroys World of Warcraft. That's not going to happen. I don't think it's in that state. Fellowship still needs a lot of polishing. There still needs to be a lot of things in order to add or improve. But the fact that Fellowship copied a lot of the best things about World of Warcraft and also Mythic Plus and put their own spin on it. And their own spin is actually really, really interesting. We talked about 12-minute dungeons, we talked about the gearing, we talked about some of the class design. It actually is a lot better. For example, I was kind of initially reluctant about trying Fellowship because a lot of people told me that it kind of looks like a mobile game. And I can't really disagree with you on that, but once you actually play it, there is a decent amount of depth into it. It's different from World of Warcraft, but also same. That's the best way I can describe it. And I do think there's going to be a lot of World of Warcraft players playing Fellowship because they want something a little bit different, they want something a little bit quicker, they want something a little bit less orangey in terms of gearing, and they're going to enjoy it a lot. Personally, for me, I don't think anything is going to replace World of Warcraft Mythic Plus in terms of the depth and the fun that you can feel. But I honestly hope that Blizzard is going to pay attention to what Fellowship is doing and take some of the inspiration from some of the good things that Fellowship implement. And I hope Fellowship is going to improve. And I hope that these two games can coexist in terms of providing a little slightly different experience for the MMO or Mythic Plus lovers. So overall, I think Fellowship is fantastic entry in the MMO. I'm not even sure if I can call it MMO genre. There might be a completely new genre that Fellowship is opening here. It's a fantastic entry. I hope it's going to build, and I hope Blizzard is going to take some inspiration. Let me know how you feel about this video, let me know how you feel about Fellowship, and let me know if you're actually playing Fellowship and if you're going to stick with it. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next guide.